Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for stress test. And in the crypto sphere, the two biggest drivers still seem to be fear and greed, but with emotions running the show, there is a serious need for the industry to develop some more accurate metrics. Fortunately, we have with us the person who can help to understand things from a new perspective, the Tai's co-founder, Joshua Frank, who now joins me in studio for this special look back at the main trends of 2019. Joshua, firstly, thanks so much for being with us here at BLOCKTV.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So to kick things off with this look back at the year as a whole, we're going to take a look, obviously, at some of the specific coins that have shined throughout the year. Josh, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so I think the first coin we should take a look at is obviously Bitcoin.
Of course.
So Bitcoin is, in a market that broadly saw losses across most altcoins this year. Bitcoin had an overall pretty good year. I mean, it started at about $3,000, and we've seen about 90% increase in the price of the digital asset. Unfortunately, one thing that we saw was that tweet volume actually was down about 1.8% on the year. So what we had seen is we saw this mass increase, and you can see that here, and I believe the area chart is tweet volumes and the line is price. We saw this large increase in tweet volume on Bitcoin. It was up to about 40,000 tweets a day, and we're back down to about 20,000. So, in the summer we saw, Bitcoin was pretty flat. It had this massive spike in the summer, but we're kind of back down to where we started again.
That sort of surge, that hump of the year, which may be how 2019 is remembered as a sort of humping.
When I was last year in July, I think Bitcoin was just hitting about $13,000. We were really excited, and now, as soon as I leave the studio, we crash back down to where we were before.
Better keep you in here, Josh. A little belt tightening is needed.
But
all right,
lock him up.
looking beyond Bitcoin, we've seen some other coins do pretty significantly if we look on that year-on-year trend.
Yeah, so I think the next one we want to take a look at was ByNance Coin. And ByNance Coin had a great start to the year and a great summer. We saw, the price of BNB really surge from, a low of $5.75 all the way up to $38.89 this year, which is, a massive, almost eightfold increase on the price of ByNance Coin. But just like Bitcoin, it's seen a pretty significant decline. I mean, I think we did a segment on this earlier this year, was, we were looking at all these assets and BNB was basically at an all-time high and everything else was down about, 60, 70, 80%, and BNB was kind of staying there, but it's since declined. Tweet volume is up about 200% on the year, but, broadly speaking, it's really dropped. We can see kind of the same thing reflected here, where at the beginning of the year, we were seeing, 40 tweets a day on ByNance Coin. We spiked to a high of 1,373, so, a 30-fold spike in the number of conversations around the asset, but we're back down to around 200 tweets a day.
Do you think this is being impacted by overarching sentiment towards Binance and the market as a whole? I mean, some of the shine seems to have been taken off the company despite its continued growth, despite its continued development. Cracks have started to form, as it were, whether we talk about their fight with the block, whether we talk about the hack from earlier on in the year. Have any of these things that might have impacted the coin?
I'm sure a bit, but I think what we've seen and what we'll see in the next couple of coins is that there's this trend of peaks on coins, right? 2019 seems to be the year of broadly 90% of the market does terribly, and there are 10 or so coins which have these peaks where people get excited, right? I think there's a lot of people within the digital asset space that are looking for the next coin and the next thing to get excited about, and we've seen that with synthetics with a peak, with BNB with a peak, with Chainlink with a peak, where there are these kind of one-off instances where these coins are doing really well, but for the most part they're kind of reverting to the mean, and that broadly speaking, these coins have been extremely correlated to one another.
All right, so jumping straight on ahead, you've isolated Grin as another one to look at. Why do you think that coin is significant?
Well, with Grin, we saw that that same massive increase, right? We had a minimum price of about 90 cents is I think close to the price of Grin now, but we did at one point see a large run up in about June or July on the price of Grin, and a large run up in the number of tweets on the asset, but broadly Grin was a new token issuance that a lot of people were excited about, and now we're down about 80% on the year. Tweet volume's down about 50%, and sentiment has gone very negative. So it's one coin that did have a big increase, but has not only reverted to the mean, has actually ended the year strongly net negative.
Right. A coin that hasn't done that, though, is Chainlink, which has seen a pretty positive turn of affairs. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, Chainlink is kind of the crypto story of 2019. I mean, it's, despite the struggles of a lot of coins across the board, Chainlink is the asset which has done very well. Chainlink is up, 500+% on the year. Tweet volumes are up about 500%. I mean, we went from the lowest price of Chainlink this year was January 1st. The lowest tweet volume on Chainlink this year is January 1st. Wow. And it basically went straight up from that. We've obviously seen some reversion. The asset's not going to, no asset is going to increase exponentially forever. Right. But broadly speaking, I mean, I think, Chainlink was, this year's Ethereum, right? If Ethereum was the coin of 2017, right. Chainlink was the coin of 2019. Right.
Certainly a good one to watch. Another one that surprisingly did better perhaps than some would have expected, Tezos. Getting some good run up this year.
Yeah, and I think that's been kind of, as I discussed, we've seen these kind of peaks and valleys for tokens, and Tezo seems to be, with synthetics, seems to be the coin that's kind of peaking now with tweet volumes up about 1,000%. And I think a lot of that is, due to the fact that a bunch of different exchanges are offering staking on Tezos, which to me, separate conversation doesn't really make sense. Is to basically it's saying the value of this coin, there's inflation, and unless you stake it, you're basically going to lose value of your token, right? So you kind of have to.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, Tezos has performed really well. It's up about 200% on the year, in a market where almost everything else has been losing value.
Yeah, certainly a powerful winner. And I mean, you have another graph here, which I think perhaps highlights some of those changes and shifters in a combined notion. These 2019 notable price changes.
Yep.
What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, and I think you can see that. So the lines here are representing 30-day price changes. You can see the colors up at the top. So Chainlink is blue, Bitcoin is red, Grin is purple. And what we've seen is just these kind of individual spikes. But by the end of the year, we see kind of this reversion where everything seems to, for the most part, we see that XTZ, which is Tezo, is moving up more than other assets. But for the most part, we saw these big movements, but everything seems to be reverting back towards the mean. And it seems like a lot of these big movements were concentrated within the first 6 months of the year, or first 7 months of the year, with the biggest movements happening in the summer.
And then, all right, so pulling back a little bit, talking about the market as a whole and who's dominating within the space. Obviously, Bitcoin had a great resurgence in the dominance, market cap dominance of this year. What can you tell us about this one?
Yeah, so we basically, saw market cap dominance, which is the percentage of market cap that an individual coin accounts for, drop across the board for almost everything except for Bitcoin. There are two exceptions to the rule, which are really ByNance coin and Tezos, which we covered, and I guess Chainlink as well has seen some sort of, or some level of increase. But for the most part, we've seen this kind of major drop. If we look at XRP and Ethereum, they both represented over 11% of the crypto market, and they're both below, there's no altcoin which is representing more than 7.2%. And I think the next chart kind of shows that, where it's Bitcoin went from 50% of market cap to above 70% at one point, is sitting close to 70% of overall crypto market cap.
Do you see anything looking at the macro picture to really justify and explain this decision, this shift back throughout 2019? Like, how did it manage to reclaim so much dominance in the space, Bitcoin that is?
I mean, I think if you look at who's allocating to the space and what they're interested in, I don't know of anybody, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you guys have a lot more guests than people I obviously talk to, but I don't know of anybody who's like, I'm going into crypto because I want to buy X coin. They're saying, I'm going to buy Bitcoin, right? The first entry point for anybody new into this market is Bitcoin, and then it's kind of fighting for that money in the crypto space, right? Bitcoin is able to attract external capital. It's able to attract institutional capital through vehicles like investment trusts and other ways to get exposure to Bitcoin. But external capital is not coming in to a different asset. It's kind of like, this is the market cap for crypto, the new money is going into Bitcoin, and then everybody else is fighting for people to kind of convert their Bitcoin into other assets.
Right. So it's that gateway, I suppose. It's still catching a lot of people at the door, and not a lot of money, not enough money is making it through to the other side to get that alt season that so many would hope for.
Right, and I think a lot of people, for example, are we've seen the amount of money that's come into GBTC, which is the Bitcoin investment trust created by Grayscale, and those people aren't buying Bitcoin directly; they're buying a trust which is holding Bitcoin for them, and they're not going to move that capital into another asset necessarily. And I think what investors are struggling to find is reasons why they should allocate to another asset over Bitcoin at this point. I mean, Bitcoin was, broadly speaking, we spoke of some exceptions, the best performing large cap coin in 2019. And there's really no argument that I think a lot of outside investors have seen, which is, I should invest in X altcoin. It's, if I want exposure to digital assets, I should invest in Bitcoin because it's a good hedge against macroeconomic uncertainty and something that's uncorrelated with any other asset.
Right. Okay. A specific flight to Bitcoin, potentially to quality, depending on how individuals want to frame that. All right. And to wrap up, some of the data that we're presented with today, you've got these wonderful graphics that you guys have put together. Tell our audience a little bit about them, and then let's go through.
Yeah, so basically what these are the most frequently used words in crypto headlines over the months. So I think this first graphic is January 2019. Right. And what's just interesting to note is just to look over time, and I think we're going to do about 4 or 5 months, of just how conversations have changed. So the size of the word is the frequency that it's been used in headlines. So the third most used word in January 2019 was ETFs. Fourth was Ethereum, seventh Tron, and the ninth and 10th were futures and launch. So it's interesting to see how the conversation this was when Bitcoin was at 3,000, the conversation that was really being driven by the mainstream media and by crypto media was all about futures launch and ETFs, right. And there was some pickup on
looking
Ethereum.
For a light at the end of the tunnel, as it were, a bright spot on the horizon.
Right, and then we see in April the conversation shifting, and Ethereum fell to the 20th most used word, where it was fourth in January, and what we see, is kind of conversation shifting to mining and bullish, and this was kind of preceding the 2019 or the run we had this summer, where the fifth most used word in April was bullish, and the fourth most used word was mining, and we see China kind of peeking into there as well. And surging as well was the sixth most used word. So this was, Bitcoin was at about 3,000 for the first 2 or 3 months, and then all of a sudden it started surging, and sentiment got bullish, and people were talking about investing in mining as
the April Fool's rally as well.
Exactly, the April Fool's rally. And then we go into October, and this is
July 1st, I believe we've got here.
Oh yes, we're skipping July. Yeah, so July was dominated by U.S. and regulators, and it was Trump was third,
wow.
Libra was fourth, Facebook was fifth. It was really dominated by the U.S. and Trump, kind of, taking a shit on Bitcoin for lack of better terms. And then Libra and Facebook, seeming to arise us out of the darkness.
Right.
And we saw that massive rally up to $13,000, which in part was definitely led by the conversation around Libra and Facebook.
For sure.
But then, things took a turn for the worse.
Was the turning part of the year, yes. After the hump, so on to October.
In October, the only really notable thing, Libra is still a pretty decent word there, but it was really ByNance. Right. And this is when we saw, as we saw in the chart earlier, that ByNance generated a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of excitement, and a lot of these things like ETFs had taken a backseat, and Ethereum and other coins really kind of fell as it related, and we see Bitcoin is still the number 1 most used word, but it was really ByNance that kind of emerged as that more unique thing, and kind of flipping to the end of the year. Something interesting to note is that in December, Ethereum has actually come all the way back to the 3rd most used word. And what we're seeing, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen on Twitter, is people getting excited about DeFi, a lot of applications that are being built on Ethereum. So Ethereum was the 23rd most used word in October, and then it went all the way up to 3rd.
Would the Istanbul hard fork be to do with that? Is that what's getting the buzz back around it, or you think it's more of a general trend?
I think it's more of a general trend. I mean, you have to look at what publications are actually publishing, and we're looking at 30 or 40,000 headlines here. Right. So I don't think the average publication is talking about Istanbul, but it's interesting to see, XRP big again, Ethereum big again, and seeing kind of this, we kind of saw it at the end of the year. I talked about Bitcoin's market cap dominance rising, but it also fell a little bit off at the end of the year. And we're kind of seeing that as well, which is that, people are kind of, people were like, oh, Bitcoin is, a digital gold. And I think we showed this on a previous segment where the mentions of gold and Bitcoin really surged in the summer, and people were very excited about that narrative. That's since kind of fallen. And I think people are now like, hey, Bitcoin is obviously the dominant asset, but there are some assets where there are some potential use cases outside from Bitcoin, or there's some reason for these things to exist. And it seems like that conversation, and I'm not taking a stance on it one way or the other, happens to be around Ethereum and XRP at this point.
All right, so now briefly looking into 2020, in terms of trends that we're going to see, I remember, back in the middle of 2019, we were talking about the markets were a bit deflated. People were concerned about risks of recessions taking place, whatnot. Now it seems everything's going from strength to strength. I'm talking particularly about in the US markets.
Sure.
As a consequence, we've been seeing Bitcoin taking a bit of a hit, and the crypto market as a whole taking a bit of a hit. Heading into 2020, are we going to see that trend continue, or what do you sort of predict sentiment-wise?
So I think we need to separate crypto out now, right? I think in a few different ways. The first is we need to separate non-Bitcoin from Bitcoin. And then as it relates to Bitcoin, we need to separate retail from institutional investors, right? So I think as it relates to retail investors within the digital asset space, what we're seeing more broadly is, we saw this massive run up, for example, on conversations on Bitcoin. They're net down on the year. So despite Bitcoin doubling, the number of Twitter users discussing Bitcoin and the number of tweets on Bitcoin are down, right? So there's nothing that seems to be bucking, and reversing that trend. There's nothing to suggest that, retail investors are going to allocate. But as it relates to Bitcoin specifically, I think we're going to see more institutional involvement, and that's from speaking with institutions as well, and from the creation of things like Fidelity digital assets and backed and different gateways and on-ramps and ways to custody assets. GBTC is now filed to basically reduce the lockup period for their token holders. There are some interesting things that are happening. You look at a lot of the biggest traditional exchanges, they may not be actively operating in the space, but they're creating indices and they're doing different things. So I think what we'll see is new entrants on the institutional side. Slow. It's not going to be what everybody was super excited for in 2017, that all of a sudden X, Y, and Z companies are going to start trading digital assets. But I think what we'll hopefully see, and I think this is what moves the asset class forward, is can we create products that are interesting to family offices and to registered investment advisors, right? If we can get an investment advisor to go out to even their high net worth client, let's not even say a retail customer, right? Let's just say they have a client who's an accredited investor. If we can make the case that, hey, you should be allocating as part of a sophisticated and diversified investment strategy a percentage of your client's net worth to digital assets through not direct investment in Bitcoin, but a vehicle, like let's say a Bitcoin only fund, doesn't need to be an ETF because that's kind of a retail on-ramp, but some sort of investment vehicle, then that's really what drives this asset class forward. And I think that there are some people that are focused on that, and that's something that we're focused on as well, is how do we create these products and these interesting opportunities which will push these investors into Bitcoin. So first registered investment advisors, but then also family offices. And if we're able to bring those groups into Bitcoin, if we can bring in, if we can get 1% of the population to put 2% of their net worth into Bitcoin, and we can get some family offices to be able to allocate into the space, that is what ultimately will drive the later institutional involvement, because that's what's going to drive that's what's going to drive liquidity. Exactly. And then that's when a big pension can come into the space. Right. So I think that's the narrative we need to watch for. If we can, if we can get these guys in the space, that liquidity will come and the institutions will come, and I think retail will come back because I think that will drive, some asset movement. I don't think retail is the next step for crypto. I think the next step is institutions in Bitcoin, and over years, not overnight.
Well, you're taking all the sexy and all the fun out of it, but perhaps right on some point there, Josh, that we need to build that institutional investment from the ground up, get those smaller guys in so we can get the bigger ones in.
Exactly.
But we'll see how that all pans out. Joshua Frank from The Tie, I want to thank you so much for coming for our special edition of Stress Test here to wrap up 2019. For our viewers at home, thanks so much for watching, and stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. Have a wonderful 2020. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.